Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Crafting Your Job and Life. I'm Mac Ingram, Director of Engagement, Alumni and Students in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Since we're virtual, please excuse any issues that may pop up. If you have issues with your video or audio, click Reconnect to return to the webinar right away. This webinar is being recorded. We will have a replay of it available on our website early next week. Also, if you have a question, drop it in the chat. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end. This webinar is part of our ongoing Backpacks to Briefcase series aimed at students and young alumni. By attending these events, you can earn credit towards an evergreen certificate. All you have to do is join us for various events throughout the year, virtually or in person. Find out more at alumni.uab.edu/backpacks. Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Laurence Boitet. In 2015, she received her undergraduate degree in microbiology from the University of Georgia. And in 2019, she earned her PhD in biomedical sciences from UAB. Dr. Boitet is currently performing postdoctoral research and is the co-founder and coordinator of UAB's GROW, Graduate Resilience Outreach and Wellness Program. Dr. Boitet, thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you. I know you're going to be sharing your screen for your slides today, so thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Can you see my screen?
We've got everything. We're ready to rock and roll.
It looks different from when we practiced now. So now I can see things. But okay, great. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining my conversation today. As they mentioned, semi-incorrectly, I'm Laurence Boitet, and I'm about 19 days old in the faculty position that you see listed on my screen. So I'm currently an assistant professor in the Department of Medical Education and the director of biomedical trainee wellness in the UAB Medicine Office of Wellness. So this talk is largely informed by the need to be authentically you in the life that you lead. So I'm just going to start off by telling you that I'm just so humbled and grateful to even have the opportunity to speak to you about something that's really near and dear to me. So major imposter syndrome here, at the very least. The organizers felt confident in my ability to teach you something meaningful today, so I'm just going to adopt their confidence for the next hour. So my hope for today is to remind you about some things that you probably already know about and introduce you to some new skills that you can use and otherwise help you craft your life in a way that's most meaningful to you. So what you see here on this slide and what you saw in the advertisements for this talk is job crafting, but I want you to pause and just reflect for a minute on where you spend the most time during the week. Let's think about it. Where do you spend the majority of your time Monday through Friday? It's at your job, right? It's at your job. I can't see you guys. I can't see the chat, but I'm assuming that maybe some of you said job. Have you ever thought about that? Or did I just start off this talk on like a really depressing note? It used to actually really bother me that Monday through Friday, my kids' teachers got to spend more time with them than I do. So thinking about my day, I get up, I get dressed, I dress my kids, I feed them breakfast, and I get them to daycare, then come straight to work. And then from the next 8 or 9 hours, they're at school and I'm here. Then they come home in the afternoon and we get about 2 or 3 hours together if we're lucky, and then it's bedtime. So that totals to what? 4 hours with me, 8 hours with school. And that's over 40 hours a week that my kids get to have active time with other people other than me and my husband. And that's kind of a depressing thought if you sit and ruminate on it, so don't do it. But the hard fact here is that jobs are essential to life, and without them, we don't have money, right? So instead of talking about job crafting, we're going to think about our lives in a more holistic fashion in life craft. Because if we're going to be spending the majority of our time at work, it's a lot easier to cope with that truth if our job feels worth it. So grab a piece of paper, and as we chat, I encourage you to dream, think, and doodle. So let's think all the way back to 2019 BC, right? Before COVID. Think back. What were you doing? Just think about it for a second. Were you thinking about the meaning behind the work that you were doing? Yes or no? While you think about that, me, depending upon what part of the year we're talking about, I was either getting ready to defend my PhD across campus here at UAB in the Ziegler building, or I was starting my first postdoctoral fellowship in the Division of Nephrology. Pre-pandemic, I feel that it's safe to assume that the majority of us were more or less in the cycle of wake up, work, go to sleep, repeat, right? Many of us were not really thinking about the job that we did beyond the constraints of the idea that this is how I get money. So we dealt with the obstacles that were thrown at us, and probably most of us didn't think to change up what we were doing because we were comfortable. Oh no, did I already skip slides? No, here we go. Okay, now fast forward to January 2020 AD, or after the death of the life as we previously knew it. COVID entered the headlines, right? We started to grapple with the idea of a pandemic, which ended up coming into full fruition, as you all know, 3 months later. Many of us started to contemplate our own mortality and the mortality of our friends and family who might be more at risk of adverse outcomes if exposed to COVID. You know, many of us experience this mortality salience, or the state of conscious awareness of illness and death. This concept is kind of depressing, but it informs the perspective of terror management theory. This is a nearly 40-year-old theory that says that the awareness of the inescapable nature of death can give rise to significant anxiety. But the silver lining, if we take it that way, is that its influence can be on human thought, behavior, and emotion. So there's this humanistic psychiatrist and author, Irvin Yalom, who said in the beginning of his book, Staring at the Sun, I recommend it, through the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death saves us. In demonstrating what this means, I want to see, well, if I could see you, a show of hands, but really to see who in the room here has started rethinking life's priorities and purpose because of the pandemic. Did you start thinking about shifting away from things that hindered your happiness to shift towards things that would increase your satisfaction? Because this was absolutely me. Going back in time, I was a recent PhD graduate, my basic science PhD. I had my first son who was born in July of 2020. And I remember sitting in my bed in the middle of the night and working on my F-32 grant proposal, next to this weeks old baby, and started to think, what in the world am I doing with my life? Realizing that I was shifting into a career that would not give me the satisfaction that I needed in every area of my life that I was seeking. So these thoughts and these facts were circulating around the environment of the world that, we all worked in and contributed to the start of the Great Resignation movement. And we started to change how we think about our work. So before we go any further, I want to introduce you to two ideas that will help you kind of conceptualize what we're going to chat about today. So for the alum out there, let's go back to school for a minute, and I promise there won't be a test unless you look at your life as a test and your overall happiness is the score, but I digress. I honestly should have put up a disclosure before this even started, because you're going to hear me pretty constantly go off on tangents on reasons why we do what we do. I'm not a huge history fan, but I am a glutton for understanding the world around me. Oops, guilty, I'm a researcher. It comes honestly, though. My graduate school mentor, he's just this vessel of knowledge. He's quite a guy to sit and have a chat with if he has a moment to spare. But throughout school, he always stressed to me the importance of knowing where you came from, including the ins and outs of whatever you study. So that meant, yeah, he really did ask me who characterized heme oxygenase when my private defense came along. It was Twin and Schmidt in 1968, if you were wondering, but that's really not the point of my talk. But I will say that if you understand the context and reason behind what you do and why you do it, it actually gives some depth and breadth to your everyday task list. But again, I digress. Here's the job demands resources model. This theory here postulates that a low level of well-being in the workplace can be a consequence of high demands combined with low job resources. So this means that the strain that we feel is a response to the imbalance between demands on us as individuals and the resources that we have to deal with those demands. And that burnout occurs when we have high demands and low resources. But in the desired state, these demands are going to be high, but the resources are also high. And this is an important point. As we go forward, we're not really going to think about lessening our job demands. Rather, we're going to acquire resources necessary to match those demands, helping us to realize this optimal work engagement state. All right, self-determination theory. So when we think about traditional motivation and performance theories like goal setting theory or job design approaches that you may have heard of, it's really under the assumption that the employee is a passive member of the process. But newer theories view employees through a lens of being active participants in their environment. So this assumes, of course, that you as an employee, you have proactive behavior, but you also realize that proactivity is directly related to the environment in most cases. So organizational research has found that job redesign approaches are best effective when they work from the bottom up and when they're initiated by employees themselves. So self-determination theory really posits that an employee performance and engagement are affected by the motivation that they have for their job activities. So this suggests that individuals are more likely to be proactive in the workplace when they are autonomously motivated based on intrinsic need for competence, autonomy, and relatedness, or our basic needs. So interestingly, the predominant social context variables are that if the organization supports or thwarts these employee basic needs, they're strongly influenced by managerial style. So when there's support for autonomy, there exists support and satisfaction of all three basic needs at the general level. And these factors are all highly correlated, just by virtue of the fact that when you have a sense of autonomy, you are more likely to seek out and satisfy your other needs yourself. So as we move forward, start thinking about your current role and whether or not your basic needs are being satisfied, and if you are playing an active role in augmenting your performance through regular resource seeking. And if you've already stopped and you said, I'm not an active resource seeker, I challenge that notion and remind you that you're currently dedicating an hour of time to learning these new skills. So we're about to redesign your role. So now that we have a handle on the science behind our conversation, let's chat briefly about stress, because I want to challenge your notion of what that means. The human brain is geared towards liking shallow tasks with quick wins, right? It's really fun when that happens. But the reality of the fact is that many of us probably have positions that require knowledge work, that requires deep focus and deep, meaningful work. But as our roles expand beyond the bullet points in our job description, our day-to-day life may very easily move away from the ability to deeply work. And just like any habit, the less we do it, the harder it is to do. So as we talk today, again, think about your job and think about how you might begin to retrain your brain to think more deeply and meaningfully to strengthen those connections to make work easy for yourself. So I mentioned that my PhD is in basic science. I found that this is difficult to talk to most people about the need to change the way that we approach work and stress. It's ironically even harder to convince a basic scientist that distress is an important thing to manage, considering that the ability to think clearly and deeply equates to the currency that we use for our jobs, right? Our brains. So let's just drive it home to those who might prioritize work over well-being. I'm guilty of it sometimes too, but we noticed in the job demands resources model that high demands and low resources drives the phenomenon that I'm sure everyone's heard of, which is burnout. This kind of distress is going to induce changes in the neuroendocrine pathways and alter the size and volume of your brain structures and the morphology of your neurons. That means distress changes your brain. Chronic distress will inhibit a feedback control pathway in the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which can decrease neurotrophic factors and impair neurogenesis and eventually lead to neuron atrophy and neuron death. Yikes. Okay, yikes. We don't like that. That doesn't sound like something we want. And in fact, when researchers took a look at the brains of people in chronic occupational stress, and that's right, stress derived from a job, they found significant thinning of the mesial frontal cortex, significant bilateral increases in amygdala volumes, and significantly reduced caudate volumes with impaired fine motor function. Yuck. So do me a favor before we go any further and indulge this thought process. I want everyone to change your definition in your brain. Using this Yerkes-Dodson human performance curve, let's just justify and define stress and how it relates to our lives. As knowledge-driven employees, we love stress. We like a challenge because challenges give us meaning and purpose, a sense of accomplishment and glory seeking that we naturally do as human beings. When we don't have this, we feel bored. And when stress becomes so great that we don't have the resources with which to deal with that stress, that's when we fall into a state of distress. And this is the pathological disease that we need to avoid, burnout. And this is usually the time in my talk where I put up a slide that describes burnout, but I'm going to save you the time. I bet you all know what I'm talking about. And I'm sure many of you are staring at this slide and saying to yourselves, man, I wish I was bored every once in a while. And that better be a red flag to you, my friends. The goal is not to be less burnt out, as if being a little bit burnt out is okay. The goal is to flourish in the workplace. So what does it mean to flourish, in case you've forgotten? So Abraham Maslow, maybe you've heard of him from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He was the first in psychology to describe the idea of well-being, describing the ideas of the self-actualized human. This idea foreshadows the idea of the PERMA model, which is the father of positive psychology Martin Seligman came up with. So Dr. Seligman once gave a talk. It was his first address as the president of the American Psychological Association back in the late 90s. He called for a shift from focusing on mental illness and pathology to studying the positivity of life, hence the father of positive psychology thing. But this was pretty groundbreaking at the time. Basic scientists take note. This is from this point forward, folks were inspired to look at interventions that helped people make life worth living, defining, quantifying, and creating well-being. How much less depressing? So here's the PERMA model. 5 components of what people pursue because they're intrinsically motivated. Positive emotions. Increasing these help us build physical, intellectual, psychological, and social resources that lead to well-being. Engagement. Seligman called it being one with the music. People are more likely to achieve this when they define and live their top character strengths. The science actually showed that people who use their strengths in new ways each day for a week, 7 days, were happier and less depressed, and those feelings lasted 6 months. Really cool. Positive relationships. This boils down to feeling supported, loved, and valued by others. A social environment is going to play a big role in preventing cognitive decline, especially important as we age, and should be important to us who have to use our brains for our jobs. Research has also demonstrated that sharing good news or celebrating successes will foster strong bonds and build better relationships. So supervisors and mentors out there in the audience, take note. This can be achieved very simply in the workplace. And meaning. Having meaning associated with what we do, defining and having this purpose helps us focus on what's really important, especially if we face challenges or adversity. Meaning, by and large, this is guided by our personal values. So people who report having meaning and purpose in their lives actually tend to have greater life satisfaction and fewer health problems. And finally, a sense of accomplishment. So this is the result of having and reaching goals. And no, not ones that are far off in the distance that take forever to achieve. No, we're setting short-term goals with big celebrations. When we have meaning and align our goals with our own personal truth, we have intrinsic internal motivation that cultivates flourishing and well-being. So having these intrinsic goals like growth and connection, this is actually proven to result in more significant gains in well-being than when you align with external motivators like money or prestige. So here's just a tiny baby glimpse into what I do every day with some of our data. So here are the correlates of well-being while we're on the topic. This is work that was done in healthcare teams, but I feel like the punchline applies to us all. What contributes most to well-being scores that are below the threshold of distress? A reasonable workload, being satisfied with the job that we do, feeling like we belong and are accepted in the place that we work, feeling like whoever we work for supports us and cares about us, and feeling that we have a sense of autonomy or control over what we do. All of these things, more or less, we have control over and can achieve through the idea of taking control of our job in life. Because the goal here is, if we could take our lives from this situation where what you like to do and what you're good at are a very far cry from what puts food on the table in the work that you actually do, to this, right? A life where our work encompasses our interests, talents, and the amount of money that we're comfortable receiving for doing it. So what if I told you that this exists and you can absolutely achieve it? This probably seems scary, it probably does. And it was scary when I did it, stepping out of my comfort zone into a whole new realm of possibilities that seemed both exciting and daunting. But fueled by this idea of mortality salience or YOLO or whatever you want to call it, a little bit of discomfort, a handful of uncomfortable conversations, and a litany of no's was well worth a life and a job that brings ultimate happiness. So again, it's not a comfortable process. Good things never come easy, but it's a process that requires a lot of dreaming and a lot of daring and a lot of communication and self-advocacy, but it is achievable. All right. So let's talk about changing up our frame of mind and recreating ourselves as essentialists. This is step one. If you haven't read this book, you should, and I make no money by recommending it to you, so that should tell you something about its quality. Let's go back to my middle of the night grant writing session with my newborn baby when I started to question every life choice I'd ever made related to my career up until this point. I made a bold switch. I jumped ship from my basic science postdoc where I studied the etiology of acute kidney injury through the dynamics of the lymphatic system. Like, what? Exactly. I took a leap of faith into a field that made me want to get out of bed every morning. This is organizational behavior, a field where I could talk to and do research on human beings so I could help them improve their experience in their jobs. And I'm telling you this because before I was even allowed to start learning in my new field, my mentor at the time, Catherine Meese, who still is one of the biggest mentors in my life, handed me this book and said, no working until you digest this information. You've got to prioritize your own life before someone else does. If you don't have the time to read the book, here's the Cliff Notes. Right here, this is the essential principle of essentialism. Many of us feel like that circle on the left, where our energy is constantly being pulled in a million different directions, where we're saying yes to a million things and losing sight of what our ultimate goal is. But when you adopt and live the idea of essentialism, you engage in this metacognitive practice that enables you to identify the most important things in your life and minimize everything else that doesn't move you towards your highest and best use of time and priority. So you're probably like, okay, great, that sounds wonderful, but how in the world do I conceptualize my ultimate goal for my entire life? Let's ask Jen Lim. So Jen Lim came up with this greenhouse model. So this is the best and biggest use of your energy, and that's your higher purpose. This is your ultimate goal that you're striving towards. The reason you exist. This is the culmination of all of your talents and passions that help you feel like we spend our time doing something meaningful, something that's bigger than ourselves, something that's more meaningful than money. What? Seriously. This is maybe taking a little bit less of a salary to do the job that ultimately makes you happy. And all through this, living our higher purpose, we're able to access the most sustainable form of happiness. Your higher purpose is one that is rooted in your intrinsic and defined values and behaviors. So our values and behaviors are how we live out that purpose, or the beliefs and daily actions we take towards reaching it. So when there is an alignment of our purpose, values, and behaviors, employees foster resilience to adapt and problem solve. And they have motivation to be productive through challenges. And I can talk all day about the worth of adopting and living the greenhouse model, but we're here to talk about job crafting, so I'm going to move on before I get too high up here on my soapbox. So when defining that higher purpose, you have to ask yourself these 3 questions. What do I feel most deeply inspired by? What meets a need in my world? And what am I talented at? From here, we actively make decisions that answer positively to those questions. So if what you're doing doesn't meet these requirements, the ask is not centralized and you're confronted with a high point of frustration. But alternatively, when you make decisions to do the right thing for the right reasons at the right time, that's when you live at the highest point of contribution, where you have set your boundaries in a way that you're able to contribute in the workplace in a way where you can give your tasks 100% of your effort and attention. Okay, so theoretically, now we have our higher purpose defined, and now we're going to start adopting the principles of an essentialist. Here you see a comparison of essentialist and non-essentialist perspectives. Notice that the essentialist thinks that they need to do all of the things for all of the people. I have definitely identified as this person in the past. They're reactive human beings. So we're prioritizing based on what is most pressing. They say yes to everything impulsively, and thus very much live a life of overwhelm and just malignant exhaustion. What's interesting about essentialism is that it points out that when priority, the word priority, entered the English language, it was singular. It wasn't until entering our vernacular that we changed it to plural. An essentialist is going to breathe this truth. The essentialist harnesses control because they have their purpose defined. So instead of using words like I have to, they use words like I choose to. When given a task, they weigh its pros and cons, and then they ask themselves, does this align with what really matters? Then they consider the trade-offs, and as a result, they get the right things done and have a sense of control over what they do. So when asked to take on a new task, they don't immediately respond with a yes, but instead they'll say, thank you for considering me. Let me think about that. So when we start using the essentialist mindset, where every task we are presented with requires a mindset shift. So first, we choose, right? We're saying I choose. We can't always control the options that are presented to us, but we can control the choices that we make and how we respond with our time and energy. Remove the words I have to from your vocabulary, because that puts you in a reactive and helpless situation. Use words like I choose to, and remember that you can always choose how to respond to your circumstances. And then we discern. So we're surrounded by noise that's going to confuse and distract us. So stop thinking that everything is important. It's just not. Learn to filter out the few vital things that are truly valuable from the massive trivialities. And then you consider your trade-offs. So trade-offs are a fact of life. You know, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So stop thinking, how can I do it all? But instead, choose the problem you want to focus on, and then ask, what trade-offs am I going to make? And how can I go really big on this? See trade-offs not necessarily as losses, but as opportunities to find the highest impact options. then don't be afraid to talk to your people about how to utilize this essence wherever you work. Okay, so here comes a big point of contention in this conversation where I might be the source of your distress. Think around what your big thing is. You know, your ultimate calling, your passion in this life. Okay, we've thought of it. Are you currently on the road to achieving that higher purpose? And if not, are you willing to change what you're doing now to fixate on accomplishing your higher purpose? Next question. Would you put your financial resources into something like training to do the job that you want to do? So we can think about this a different way. This is the lottery experiment. Spend $1, get $1 million. This always causes an interesting discussion. What would you do if you won? How would you spend your time if you didn't have to work? Would you keep certain features of your job in your new millionaire lifestyle? I think this really forces you to think about what parts of your job are the most fulfilling to you. Here's my example. When contemplating my big career change, I went back to my medical school personal statement. That's right, I applied to medical school. I've had it passed, okay? But I said that the life mission was to help people. It's pretty general, but I like it. This was based off of my just sincere disdain for diseases that have killed people and my mortality salience back in college when I lost 2 of my friends back to suicide. Obviously, I decided to pursue research instead of medicine, and here I am today, but that's because my brain enjoyed falling down pondering rabbit holes and intense analyses rather than having to make stressful, quick decisions and diagnoses in a clinic. But ultimately, in my graduate school work, was I accomplishing helping people? I mean, definitely, right? Was working on translational projects that were able to help patients, but was it fulfilling to me? Not necessarily. When I made the switch to behavioral research, was I still helping people? Yes. But was my reach and impact one that was more fulfilling from day to day? Definitely. If I won the lottery tomorrow, would I quit my job and never work again? No, and that's not because I'm scared that my boss is listening to this talk right now. My life mission will always be the same. I will always seek to use my passions to make the biggest impact that I can. I'll definitely enjoy not stressing about paying my daycare tuition, which exceeds my mortgage payment, but I simply enjoy my job too much to quit it. When you become an essentialist, this is a lifelong process. It's going to change as you change, right? Because we are fluid people. We grow and we change every day. The pursuit of less, though, can change your life. So it's going to gain more clarity. You're going to gain more clarity in the process. These essential things become more important to you compared just to the next task on your to-do list. The execution of the essential eventually becomes effortless. You gain more control because you gain skills in pausing, pushing back, and taking your time instead of rushing it. You prioritize your own life because you have the power to do so. And in doing that, you gain joy in the journey, right? You focus on what's important right now, which helps you live in the moment. Even the wise Dalai Lama said, simplicity is extremely important for happiness. So it boils down to this. If it isn't a heck yes, it's a big NO, right? No. After we optimize your brain for effective decision-making, like we've been talking about for the last, I don't know how many minutes, we now need to start editing. What is currently on my plate, and what are things that I can just kind of scoot off into the trash? Consider the trade-offs. I mean, okay, let's get real. If your supervisor, your mentor, boss, chief, CEO, or whatever is asking you to do it, maybe consider doing it, right? I'm not suggesting that you shout heck no in the face of your employer. This is definitely not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is starting a conversation about re-realizing your job in a way that makes it more meaningful to you. With the reasoning that happy people bring the biggest profits and the biggest return on your investment, both from the perspective of the employee and the employer. There are also things that you're asked to do on a daily basis that you might have the opportunity to say no to, and that's something to consider. But as an essentialist, we are defining our own purpose, right? We're clarifying our purpose. We're daring to use the power of a graceful no. We're uncommitting, so that means we're winning by cutting our losses. We're editing and learning the invisible art of such, and we're limiting, meaning we have the freedom to set boundaries and the ability to set extreme criteria to that. So take a look around and really invest on the process of making this decision. Think to yourself, can you accomplish your purpose and satisfy your passion with your current job in your current profession? Can you maximize the features of that job that you love and minimize those that you don't? Do you need to go back and reassess your career goal? Is this an opportunity for a new training or to build in a different direction? I strongly encourage you to meditate on this and perform thought experiments with this, because really at the end of the day, you are the asset that produces the work. So we have to take drastic steps to protect yourself, right? How do we do that? I bet there are a few of you in the audience that are like, okay, get to the point, woman. So here we are. The point of this whole talk, job crafting, getting new meaning out of the same role. All right, job crafting is cool. It's about taking proactive steps and actions to really redesign what we do at work, essentially changing tasks, relationships, perceptions of our job. The main premise is that we stay in the same role, but we get more meaning out of our jobs simply by changing what we do and the whole point behind it. So job crafting is really defined as a proactive behavior that employees can use when they feel like changes in their jobs are necessary. So this process was defined by Maria Timms and Arnold Backer not so long ago, although if you ask them, they will probably attribute that theoretical background to Kulik and colleagues, and it was established back in 1987. But it's based on that job demands resources theory that we talked about earlier, in that it's an employee-initiated approach which will enable employees to shape their own work environment such that it fits their individual needs by adjusting the prevailing job demands and job resources. So research around this topic really shows that this process improves employee experience and engagement, identity, meaning in work, professional growth, job satisfaction, performance and innovation, collaboration, well-being, all this great stuff that we want. So when we actually think about doing it, there are 3 different avenues that we can really go down. So 3 types of job crafting. The first being task crafting. So task crafting may be probably the most discussed aspect of this approach, perhaps because job crafting is commonly seen as an act of shaping or molding of your role. It can involve adding or dropping responsibilities that you've set out in your official job description. And this type of crafting might also, or alternatively, involve changing the nature of certain responsibilities or dedicating different amounts of time to what you currently do. So in task crafting, crafters are going to alter the number, type, and nature of tasks that they're given. This can really be emphasis of tasks related to your passion, taking on additional tasks related to that passion, or changing tasks to really cope with difficulty and adversity. Overall, this involves improving the way that things are done, using skills that you already have, or adding in resources based on your interests. So in doing so, you can exert a level of control over your work, which has been shown, obviously, to minimize negative feelings towards what you do. So in a general sense, let's say, for example, my job as a chef. I'm not just serving food. I'm creating a beautifully designed plate that enhances my client's dining experience. If I'm a bus driver, I'm not just driving through the city necessarily, but perhaps I'm getting on the intercom and providing helpful sightseeing advice to tourists along my route. Relationship. So this is how people reshape the type and nature of the interactions that they have with others. So in other words, relationship crafting, this can involve changing up who we work with on different tasks or who we communicate and engage with on a regular basis. People are power. We can relationship craft by building meaningful, helpful, or energizing relationships with others, expanding our roles to make a greater impact, tailoring relationships to serve specific benefits, or simply using our network to our advantage. So this may look like me going to a conference and listening to the plenary talk, then having the courage to walk up to the speaker after they're done and introduce myself, ask some questions, and maybe attempt to establish a working relationship with that human. Task and relationship crafting, I think, can be combined, at least in my perspective, in a really unique way. This can be an avenue to develop a new skill set or deepen our understanding of something that we already do. We can change the nature of a task by learning more about it and then leaning on our network to explore more deeply the constraints of what we do. Then we have cognitive crafting. So this is the third type of crafting. So this is how people change their mindsets about what they do. So by changing perspective on what we're doing, we can find or create more meaning about what we might otherwise see as busy work. When I talk to people about cognitive crafting, a lot of times this is the one that they poo-poo, right? I like to tell people, though, that this is what we resort to when we don't have ideas on how to task or relationship craft yet. So we're going to take some time to really redefine the existing work to reflect on what you see as being the real impact. So in doing this, you're evaluating how work influences you and how you're connected to that work, but then also how your work aligns with your personal goals, ideals, passions, or whatever. So for me, for example, one way that I've cognitively crafted is by redirecting stress and anxiety around giving talks, which is an important part of my job, but redefining that energy into excitement to share my knowledge with people who choose to attend my speaking engagements. So in starting the process of job crafting, you really need to identify the types of demands that you face and the resources that you have at your disposal. And I have a worksheet that I can throw in the chat or something later, figure out a way to get to you to help you work through this. So a challenging demand. These are demands that lead to personal gain or growth when you're able to surmount them. So this is like saying, this is really hard, but if I do this, it's going to launch me into a state of growth. But a hindering demand on the other side is they unnecessarily thwart personal growth and goal attainment and hinder optimal functioning. So this is like spending hours and hours on maybe an administrative task or something that is unnecessarily complicated and duplicative. Structural resources, moving into the resources bucket. These are individual attributes or organizational aspects of the job that may help you achieve work goals or stimulate personal growth, learning, and development, like autonomy. These might be professional growth opportunities, hiring someone else to help you, something of that nature. And then social resources. So increasing your social connections, enhancing existing relationships with people around you, networking, mentoring, having bonds with coworkers. And of course, these are just suggestions. There have been new trends in the job crafting literature, for example. Recently there's been an introduction of the idea of optimizing demands, or rather than avoiding hindering demands, it focuses on addressing those demands by improving work conditions or tasks. So maybe making something that was a hindering demand work better in your specific context. There also now exists the idea of collaborative or team crafting, which I love, in which two or more team members that you work with can collectively determine how they can alter a task, relationship, or cognitive boundary to their work to meet shared goals. So we're synergizing efforts, and we do this a lot in research. So just some options, some things to think about, things to noodle on while you're kind of thinking about your job crafting idea. So if you're looking to increase structural resources, these again relate to the content of your work and the way that it's done. There are many, many ways to do this. Like, for example, there are resources out there now that allow you to take courses in your free time, to earn certificates in areas that you're passionate about to grow your skill set, right? This also makes you a more interesting and engaging employee. It might also make you marketable for a raise or a promotion, but you're looking for ways to increase your autonomy, increase task variety, and increase administrative support if you need it. When you're looking to increase social resources, so this is the pursuit of realizing your full potential, right? You need ideas and suggestions from others, a diversity of perspective. Most of the time, though, organizations don't really have resources in place to properly or adequately offer feedback, advice, or mentorship on a personal level. But that doesn't necessarily mean you don't have access to it. So you're looking outside of your team or your department or your company to find people who will help you grow and develop. So for example, in my role, I have resources within my office to help me do what I need to do. But if I need insight in leadership research, I go down the street to my colleague who's an expert on this topic in the business school. And if I need advice on how to assess a programmatic intervention, I go to my colleague in the School of Education who does that. When I need someone outside of my field to read a grant to make sure that it makes sense, I go to somebody that I met at a conference years ago who just has a keen eye for continuity and cohesion. You seek out people who are different than you so you can grow and expand your horizons. And you can really achieve that very simply by continuously asking for feedback, starting career coaching, or just communicating with others and sharing tasks. For hindering demands, here we're shedding those stressful tasks or relationships. The idea to start to approach this is just keep track of your work for a few weeks. Make note about what you do that's energy giving and then what's energy depleting. And then you have to have the hard conversation with your supervisor or your mentor or your colleague or whoever to renegotiate your task or your role. You need to be forthcoming with what causes you distress and hinders your productivity. But also walk into that meeting with plausible solutions. Pro tip. People are oftentimes way more amenable to crafting away hindering demands if you show up with a solution or solutions to the problems that you disclose. So do your research, remove those barriers to your efficiency, and help. You can also, as an option, delegate some tasks to others. And in increasing job demands, or challenging job demands, these are the good stuff. Don't give away the good hard stuff. You pursue and take on tasks that force you to grow and think differently than you did before. You can adopt Google's plan. They actually are a really cool company where they set aside 20% of their employees' time to pursue passion projects that are dedicated to novel and useful ideas. Super cool, but I'm guessing your company doesn't have that for you. But the good news is you don't have to wait for your company to suggest that you do it. If it's a little too scary, maybe think about taking a leap and taking charge of a new project in the office. Or as a colleague of mine suggested to his students yesterday, maybe this means saying yes to a task that everyone else in your group has said no to. But make sure that task aligns with your ultimate career goals. Start a new project, take on a larger role in a project, do something that is what challenge your brain to think and learn. Okay, I got 2 slides left, so let's wind down. To really execute all that we talked about today, we rely on a concept rooted in collaborative job crafting. So I mentioned earlier about how job design is a top-down approach, while job crafting is more employee-initiated. But in many of our roles, redefining what we do, unless we're just going for a complete rule remodel, it's going to involve a conversation with someone we work with. And one of the biggest takeaways that I can recommend is approaching your people to have this conversation. Prioritize your life before someone else does, right? If you don't really have a work environment that's psychologically safe, where you feel like you can have important conversations with your boss without suffering some sort of a consequence, then you and I need to have a different conversation. But otherwise, when approaching someone about optimizing your job life, a task comes with outcomes that benefit both the employee and the employer. And the worst thing they can say to you is no. So you might as well try. Focus. It's a limited and finite resource. Most of you have probably learned at this point in your life that once you've spent your focus time, it's spent for the day. And recognize, acknowledge, and just live with that fact. Depleting focus is a thing, and that's done most quickly with constant task switching, and we are great at that these days, right? Email open, grading open, presentations open, a paper's open, analysis is open, my phone's on, everything is beeping and buzzing and dinging, and there's no clean switch between tasks. And the more you switch from task to task, the more depleting it is on your store of focus. So accomplishing this is shutting down your email, putting your phone on do not disturb, separating your knowledge work from your empowering work. All right, so this is the idea of deep work. This can look different from person to person for sure. And there's really 3 popular ways that you can do this: monastic work, rhythmic work, and journalistic work. So the monastic philosophy has one basic principle. You cut out all activities to focus on this deep work. People who follow this monastic strategy really abolish any extra work not related to their main projects. And this means that they go weeks or months without answering emails or doing paperwork. Maybe not so great of a thing in the job that you have particularly. There's also a rhythmic strategy, and it's based on 2 fundamental truths: that humans are a creature of habit, and deep work is rarely performed if not scheduled. So this means that every day you're figuring out and journaling and just trying to decipher what time of the day your brain works the best at, and then blocking off time in your schedule to do deep work during that time. So this is what I do. This really guarantees results by turning deep work efforts into a daily habit. So you can see me most of the time if you look at my calendar from about 7:30 or 8 a.m. into 11. This is where my brain works the best. It's blocked off on my calendar as deep work time. There's also journalistic philosophy that fits into this deep work. So this means you're doing deep work whenever possible. So kudos to any person who can do this. This is not me. I take a significant activation energy to engage in something that involves my entire brain. But this means that if you don't have any obligations to meet at the current moment, you're using that extra time to tackle deep work. So instead of glazing over your emails, you're actually making progress on your projects. And my last point, declaring a war on drugs. The drug being dopamine, right? This instant gratification thing. Challenging you in your life to just not buy into that culture of immediacy. You don't need to answer an email the second it hits your inbox. When you walk into your office in the morning, it might be scrolling through your emails and figuring out what emails do I need to answer, right? What emails do need to be answered so that person who sent the email can go on with their day versus ones that might be able to wait until I'm done with using my deep focus time. It's also cutting out our reliance on technology, right? They actually did a study with children that had to be stopped for ethical reasons, because when they took technology away from children, they actually had physical withdrawals, meltdowns, just horrible physical reactions to this. So recognizing that we've grown so accustomed to having technology at our fingertips that most of us are probably addicted. So taking an aggressive approach to digital stewardship, like these networking tools, they can be really great, right? Connecting with friends across the country on social media, news sites, engaging in things that you need to keep up with, but remembering also that they can be toxic. Always remembering that you need to have a shutdown routine, right? Work will always be there tomorrow. Your email will always be there tomorrow, but your friends and family, they might not be. So putting a stop to your workday at a certain time, ending your workday and ending access to your network tools like your email, just making that transition to not be at work. To me, I have such a hard time breaking away with work that sometimes I literally just shut my laptop and say, Laurence is shutting down for the day, and I walk away. So remember at the beginning of the talk, we talked about job demands and resources, and then discussed briefly about how productivity in employees is as much driven by personal qualities as it is nurtured by the environment and managerial style. Proactive personalities positively relate to job performance through work engagement and job crafting. So employees with proactive personalities were more likely to be involved in job crafting. They were more likely to be open to new information, be more productive, and more willing to go the extra mile. This promoted greater engagement at work, facilitating an alignment between job resources, job demands, personal needs, and your own capabilities. And employees who increased their structural resources, social resources, and specific aspects of job demands received higher performance ratings compared to their coworkers. Workplace culture and community matter. The foundation of successful work environments relies on trust, safety, recognition of that employee. So always remembering that our brains are our currency. And in today's workforce, there's a unique and demanding culture that exists. So taking advantage of your environment and having important conversations with people make a huge difference on the way that you will be able to approach your world. One word of caution before we leave, job crafting can absolutely fix a misfit between a person and a job. As you continue to grow and change as an individual, your job can, in most cases, grow and change with you. But job crafting will not fix a misfit between an organization and an individual based on those organizational values, nor will it help with the misidentification of vocation or a lack of identity in your profession. So job crafting might also not be well received by other people. So open communication and respect are going to be key in this process. But at the end of the day, you and you alone are responsible for your job satisfaction, and you have to be an active participant in your pursuit of happiness. Your job has the ability to launch you into the future of your career or become one of the biggest stressors that you have to deal with. So I'm around if you need to talk to me about problems and potential solutions. Don't push off that conversation until it's too late. So if you're interested in learning more about job crafting or anything else we discussed today, let me know. I'm happy to share some resources with you and to help you explore that avenue.
Dr. Boitet, thank you so much. That was fantastic information. And I know we've got a couple questions coming in. So if you're in here, please toss your questions in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you and get these questions answered. I know one, it was, something you just talked about just kind of the addiction to technology and those kind of things. Well, with a hybrid shift, in so many workplaces, like you said, it's hard to turn it off. It's whether it's our phone, whether we're sitting on our couch or whatever we're doing, you have easy access to it. So is it literally just telling yourself to turn it off?
Yeah, and I know I struggle with this every day. My husband is like literally trying to like shove my phone away from me when I'm home, and he's right to do so. We've kind of gotten to the point in our house where when we come in the door at night, we have a literal box. It's kind of sad. A literal box where we drop our phones and shut it and say, this is where our phones live until the kids go to bed. And then if you really need to look at your phone, then fine, catch up with your friends or do whatever. But also the reality of work is sometimes, like for instance, a few weeks ago, my toddler threw up at school and had to come home, right? So a lot of my work for that day had to happen after he went to bed. But that means that I have on my email signature a little highlighted and bolded sentence that says, if you're receiving this email outside of your dedicated work hours, I hope you feel no pressure to answer it. And answer it when you have the time and capacity to do so, right? So trying to push forward that culture of like, I'm working now, but that does not mean you need to work right now.
Absolutely. Right. No, I like that. I like that approach, and I even like the literal box. Might even do that in my house. So when you talk through just kind of the multitasking, you all got many different things going on and putting your brain on different things. In your mind, I don't know if science proves it or what, but what are too many things to actually be focusing on?
More than one.
More than one.
More than one thing.
Yep.
So, I call this my Bible. It is my notebook. It's filled with, tasks, to-do items and things. And at the beginning of every day, I don't know if you can see it, I will make a list and put stars next to the most important things. So when I walk into my office, and we call it my cave here because I hate fluorescent lights. I have my plant lights and my lamp, and I turn off all the lights and I pull up what I need to focus on, put everything else on do not disturb, and just hit the timer and go. From that 8 a.m. to that 11 or 11:30, I focus on one task at a time until it's complete. And I feel that I get more meaningful, more productive, and more quality work out of devoting 100% of my fresh morning brain to that task. Yeah,
I like it. So you like to-do lists.
I would die
with
live
off to-do list.
Yeah, and you can't really see it on my mirror or my window.
I hear you.
My window is covered in expo marker to do goals and things.
I love it. Okay, so the last question I'm seeing right here is along the sides of I guess the hybrid workforce and all that. What are, like, when you think about the job satisfaction and all these conversations that we're having, how do you expect all that to kind of shift with where it's all gone after COVID? You know what I mean? So basically, finding your place, having those conversations, workplace culture, all these things, I'm assuming it's going to be a challenge that we're always facing now that people are working more from home.
Right. So, I mean, it's just having an authentic stance on who you are as a person and trying to just be open and respectful. And, if you're having an issue, walking into your boss or your supervisor's office and saying like, hey, can I have a minute? You can't necessarily expect everyone to be friendly and personable, but you do have some power in opening that door and being the friendly one to start that conversation. Because likely if you're experiencing, some sort of stress or adversity in your role, you're likely not the only one experiencing it. So kind of addressing it before it becomes more of a malignant issue is something that you should be done. And like I said, if you don't work in an environment where you feel like you can walk into someone's office and positively change your work environment, it just might not be the place for you. And it's a hard truth to accept, but you'll be happier somewhere else.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Totally agree. Well, Dr. Boytet, thank you so much. The comments are wonderful. Everybody absolutely adored you and said you were very personable and so funny and really enjoyed this session. That's about the overwhelming response. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And hope to have you on again for something else.
Yeah, definitely. And y'all have, or hopefully have, my email. I can throw it in the chat really quick. Emailing me if you need me. I'm always here.
Awesome. Awesome. Yep. I see your email right there. So thank you. A quick reminder, today's webinar will be uploaded onto our website early next week. As a live attendee, you will get an email once the link is ready. Coming up on our webinar series, join us for the following. On Thursday, October 26th, join verified content creator Joshua Darren for Haunts and History, the Reality of Urban Legends, as we explore the paranormal and folklore in Alabama and the South. On Thursday, November 9th, Dr. Benjamin Meadows will be here for an economist goes shopping. Black Friday, holidays, and the current economic climate. Dr. Meadows will share what the current economy is like and what we can expect heading into 2024. On Thursday, December 7th, we'll be exploring National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. During we're going to have the happiest Christmas. Gareth Jones will share why this movie has become a cult classic. And come back in the new year on January 18th for Eating Well on a Budget, wallet-friendly strategies for nutritious meals. Emily Davidson will join us to share tips on how to meal plan and get the best bang for your buck. Register for these and many more at alumni.uab.edu/events. Finally, let us know your thoughts. What did you think about today's webinar? What topics would you like to see presented? Let us know by following the link through the QR code on your screen. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.